42 years. I gave that company 42 years of my life. And on the last day, they handed me a cake from Costco and a card that 31 people had signed. Some of them spelled my name wrong. I drove home, walked through the front door, and my wife looked up from the couch and said, "You're early." And I remember standing in the entryway, briefcase still in my hand, thinking, early for what exactly? I'm 68 years old. I have nowhere to be, ever again. That was the moment I realized I had no idea who I was. Not what I did, who I was. And if you're watching this, if you're somewhere close to that door, or you've already walked through it, I need you to hear what I'm about to say. Because nobody told me any of this, and it cost me almost 3 years of my life before I figured it out. The first thing that hit me wasn't sadness. It was boredom. And I don't mean the kind of boredom where you need something to watch on a Sunday afternoon. I mean a deep, physical, almost violent boredom. The kind that sits in your chest. I'd wake up at 5:47 in the morning, my body still punching the clock, and I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, and there was this silence that felt aggressive. My cardiologist, a man named Dr. Rashid, who does not mince words, told me that retirement increases the risk of a heart attack by 40% in the first year. 40%. He said boredom isn't just psychological, it's physiological. Your cortisol spikes, your blood pressure rises, your body is calibrated for urgency, and when the urgency disappears, it panics. He told me this while I was sitting in his office 6 months after I retired, blood pressure at 162/95. Which it had never been in my working life. I had more time to relax than I'd ever had, and I was falling apart. That was a hard truth to sit with. There was a man in my neighborhood named Gerald, retired at 64 from a sales management job he'd held for 27 years. Gerald did everything right, supposedly. He had savings, a pension, a plan. His wife had made a whole binder. I'm not joking, she showed it to me once, a 3-ring binder, with activities and trips and projects. And Gerald spent the first year checking boxes, golf, a cruise, the grandkids. And then one afternoon, about 14 months in, I saw him sitting on his front porch at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, just staring at the street, not reading, not on his phone, just staring. I waved. He waved back. Something in his eyes was absent. He told me later that he'd felt fine for months, and then one day just stopped. Couldn't explain it. His wife thought he was depressed. He thought he was lazy. Neither of them understood that what Gerald was experiencing was an identity crisis so complete that he couldn't locate himself inside his own life anymore. Because here's the thing nobody says out loud. Your job wasn't just your job. It was your answer to every question. What do you do? Where do you go? Who needs you today? The job answered all of that. And when it's gone, those questions don't disappear. They get louder. I had been a vice president at a regional manufacturing firm. Not a CEO, not famous, but within that building I was someone. People stopped what they were doing when I walked in. They asked my opinion. They waited for my decisions. Purpose is too soft a word. I had weight. And then on a Friday in October, I didn't. And on Monday morning, the meetings I had been in every week for a decade happened without me. And within about 3 weeks, I genuinely began to wonder if I had ever existed at all. That sounds dramatic, I know it does. But I think some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. And here's the part that made it worse. And this is the thing I want to say slowly because it matters. I felt ashamed. Everyone kept telling me these were the best years of my life. You worked so hard for this. You earned this. My sister called every week and said, "Are you enjoying it?" And I would say yes, because what was I supposed to say? That I woke up every morning feeling like I'd been erased, that I missed traffic, that I missed the 40-minute commute because at least the commute meant I was going somewhere. You can't say that. So you perform gratitude. You talk about the freedom. And the silence piles up. There's a name for this now. Retirement depression, retirement anxiety. The therapists are full of people over 60 who came in 6 months to a year after retiring. People who by every external measure had done everything right. And they're sitting on the couch, completely unmoored. My wife's friend Diane, 66 years old, a retired school principal from Columbus, Ohio, told me she didn't leave the house for 11 days once. 11 days. Her husband thought she was sick. She was sick, just not the way he understood. The guilt of struggling when you're supposed to be celebrating. That's its own kind of prison. And then there was the marriage. I need to talk about the marriage. My wife Carol and I had been together for 39 years at the point I retired. A good marriage. A real one, not a perfect one. And I want to be careful here because she might watch this. Carol, if you're watching this, I love you, and I'm going to tell the truth. For most of our marriage, we had a rhythm. I left at 7. She had the house to herself until 3. We had dinner at 6:30. We had 8 hours apart, every day, built into the architecture of our life. That space was something we never talked about, but both of us relied on. And then suddenly, we had 0 hours apart. Every morning, both of us in the kitchen. Every afternoon, both of us in the house. Every decision, where to eat, what to watch, how warm to keep the house. Suddenly a negotiation. By month 3, we were getting on each other's nerves in ways that felt new and specific, and neither of us understood why. Because we loved each other and nothing was technically wrong. I read later that divorce rates spiked significantly in the first 2 years of retirement. And I believe it because we came close. Not to divorce, but to a kind of quiet, polite estrangement. We were becoming, and this is the phrase that hit me when I finally found the words, polite strangers sharing a kitchen. We'd been through everything together. And retirement, the thing that was supposed to be our reward, was the thing quietly pulling us apart. What saved us was a conversation we had on a Tuesday night in February, sitting in the car in the driveway after a dinner that had been tense for reasons we couldn't name. She said, "I feel like you're grieving something and you won't tell me what it is." And I had to admit that I didn't know what it was either. That was the beginning, not the fix, the beginning. We started carving out hours separately by design. She had her mornings. I had my afternoons. We started having actual conversations again instead of just logistics. But it took work. More than I expected. Now the friendship thing. This one stings, even now. I was what I would have called at the time a friendly person. I knew everybody at the office. I had lunch with people. I was invited to things. I thought I had friends. And then I retired. And within 6 months, I realized I had colleagues. Every single relationship I had built over 42 years of professional life was built on proximity and transaction. These were people I liked because I saw them every day. They liked me for the same reason. When the office closed behind me, not one of them called to have lunch within the first 6 months. Not one. I called 2 of them. We had coffee. It was pleasant. It was also unmistakably the conversation of people who no longer have anything in common except a building they used to share. I was not prepared for that. There's research on this, and I don't usually cite research because what do I know? I'm not a scientist. But I came across a statistic that said men over 50 in the United States have fewer close friends than almost any other demographic. The average American man my age has fewer than 2 people he considers close friends. 2. And when one of those is your wife, you're essentially alone. That was me. That was Gerald, too, I found out later. That was, I think, most of the men I know who retired in the same window I did. We had spent decades building careers and very little time building friendships that could survive without an office attached to them. A man named Robert, a retired contractor I met at a woodworking class I eventually started going to, more on that in a second, told me he didn't realize how lonely he was until his dog died. He said that dog had been the only living thing he talked to honestly every day. He was 67 years old, had 2 adult children, had been married for 30 years, and the truest relationship in his life was with a golden retriever named Earl. That wasn't a failure of character. That was the product of a lifetime that had no structure for male friendship outside of work. Now, here is what started to shift things for me. It didn't come from a book. It didn't come from a life coach or a retirement planning seminar. It came from a Thursday morning when I signed up for a woodworking class at the community center, mostly because Carol suggested it and I was desperate enough to listen. The class was taught by a man named Pete, who was 61 and had the patience of a saint. And within 6 weeks, I had made a terrible-looking bookshelf and 3 real friendships. Nothing dramatic, just men sitting around working with their hands. And somewhere in the silence of the sawdust and the small talk, actual human connection happened. It was the most unexpected thing. What I realized is that what I needed wasn't a schedule. I had tried the schedule, filled every hour with something, activity after activity, what a therapist I saw briefly described as productivity cosplay, performing busyness because busyness had always been proof of worth. I grew up in a generation that was told you are what you produce, and for most of my life I believed it. That belief ran deeper than I knew, deeper than career, deeper than income. It was tied to feeling seen, feeling loved, feeling like I had a right to take up space. When I stopped producing, I stopped knowing how to justify my own existence. That is an awful sentence to type, but it is the truth. What actually worked was what I now think of as a portfolio. Not one big purpose, because that's what I'd had at work and it had vanished overnight, but a collection of small ones. The woodworking class on Thursdays, volunteering at a dog shelter on Saturday mornings, which is where I met Robert again, coincidentally, and where I also spent 2 hours a week being genuinely needed by animals who had nobody. Walking a neighbor's dog named Tuesday, an absurdly named Beagle, every morning at 8. Starting a standing phone call with my college roommate Dennis, who lives in Phoenix, and who I had not spoken to seriously in 20 years. Just 40 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon. That was it. But those things stitched together into something that had enough weight to hold me. The purpose didn't come as a single revelation. It came slowly, almost sneakily, one ordinary Tuesday at a time. And here's what I want to leave you with, because this is the part I wish someone had said to me before I walked through that door. Struggling in retirement doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean you were wrong to want it, or that you should have kept working. It means you were human, and you had built a life around structures that quietly held you up without you ever noticing them. And when those structures were removed, you felt the floor shift. That's not weakness, that's physics. The mirror thing, the title I gave this, the not recognizing yourself. I genuinely did not recognize the man I saw in the mirror for about 2 years, not physically. Something behind the eyes, the absence of urgency maybe, or the presence of something that looked like fear. It took me until I was almost 70 to find him again. Not the old version, that man is gone, and honestly, good. But a version that made sense, a version with somewhere to be on a Thursday, a version who could tell you without hesitation 3 people who would actually notice if he disappeared. You still have time I didn't use. That's not me being optimistic. That's just the calendar. If any of this sat with you the way I needed it to sit with me, share it with someone who just retired, or someone who's about to. Because I think there are a lot of people who need someone to say this out loud. Drop a comment and tell me where you are in this. I read them. Subscribe if you want more conversations like this one, and I'll see you in the next one.